one of my greatest experiences was he and Barry White had founded a foundation together, and they had a Valentine. It was February 14th, 1976, and it was the Valentine's Day program at Radio City Music Hall, and it consisted of Barry White, Love Unlimited Orchestra, and the orchestra had 100 female players. Every person in the orchestra was female for Valentine's Day.
Well done.
It was, and, you know, if you've ever been to Radio City, they have this hydraulic staging. So Frankie Crocker came out, and he's standing there, and he's doing his little thing, and he introduces Barry White. Well, Frankie Crocker goes down, and up comes Barry White, and he's wearing this this yellow suit. He looked like a big school bus with a jerry curl. But
is there anything better than a trip getting ready? Nope. For a long journey where our podcast released a new epi, searching for a fade fiend, new fixation. Giving this a subscribe is the same sensation. Started with the day ones, they gave us fuel to support the season. Could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here for a reason. Notification bells, text some friends, all to let you know. Check your Bluetooth, connect, talk your wisdom out.
Welcome in, everyone. Season 2, episode 14. Old Bay All Day with our guest, Douglas Boone. Douglas Boone Jr., as it is. I want to start there, sir. What could you tell us about Douglas Boone, the first iteration? Very curious.
I used to call him the original Douglas. I am a proud son of Douglas and Ann Boone. Douglas was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. Served in the United States Navy and during World War II. Took the GI Bill and went to Hampton Institute to further his education. He wanted to be a physical education teacher. Unfortunately, during that time, there were only 2 schools in the Baltimore City school system that accepted African-American coaches and PE teachers, and all those positions were filled. So what he did, he decided to self-teach himself to become a welder. He worked at the shipyard in Sparrows Point, Maryland, started to become proficient in welding, and then he got a job with the Department of Defense at Aberdeen Proving Ground, which is about 40 miles north of Baltimore, and he taught welding to soldiers, and then he moved up from that point. But while he was at Hampton Institute, he met Ann Lilly from Harlem, New York City. Fell madly in love, got married, and myself, my brother, and my late sister were a byproduct of that union. So I was born in New York and stayed there for about 6 weeks because my mother felt comfortable with her mother, my grandmother, in this process. And then Dad was back in Baltimore setting up housekeeping for me to come back to, and also getting employment in the whole 9 yards. So that's how I got started.
Okay, well, then we're going to start this with a little bit of drama. What's the better city, sir? Harlem, New York, or Baltimore?
You know, they all have their qualities. I'm a Baltimorean through and through. But once I graduated, I always had a piece of New York in me. My sister, my brother not so much. My sister ended up living in Queens until her death. And my brother moved to Virginia. Of course, here I am in Texas, but I've lived in, after I graduated college, I lived in New Jersey, worked in New York City for 5 years. And I kind of took care of my curiosity about living in the Big Apple. Yeah. And I left there and went to Boston, which was like a little New York, a microcosm of New York City.
Yes, sir.
And I realized that I didn't necessarily want to pay me a whole lot of money to go back to live in New York. You know, New York is a lifestyle that you have to get used to. And sometimes people do get used to it. Sometimes folks don't. My wife loves going to New York to visit, but I know she would never want to live there. You know, she's from Giddings, Texas, a far place for her to go to New York and the Big Apple is a lot of fun, but to stay there day in and day out is a different concept.
Okay, I kind of want to come back to one other little item here. In New York, which borough do you like the most? Where do you see yourself normally aligning with?
I've spent time because my sister lived in Queens. My grandparents lived in Manhattan. Then they moved to the Bronx, to what was called Co-op City at the time, still is. And I've only driven through Staten Island, driving up to New York, and have very little time spent in Brooklyn. But if I were to, my favorite, I'm inclined to say, well, Manhattan, because of working and what it represents in terms of the city and the atmosphere. I mean, that's New York as far as most people know. Yeah. From a residential standpoint, I'm inclined to go with Queens. It's a little more residential with separate homes, that kind of thing. But you know, it is what it is, no question.
Oh yeah. So I want to go back to the original Douglas. We're gonna have we got to do a little history lesson. So the Mason-Dixon line started at the border of Virginia and Maryland.
That's not
Baltimore being.
No, let me correct you there. The Mason-Dixon line is between Pennsylvania and Maryland.
Oh, okay, all right. So then that does help me here because I thought Baltimore may be one of those first progressive cities. How did your dad represent it in those times? Did he represent it well, or was it the fact that there were only two schools and he couldn't go after his first passion kind of was a microcosm of how the entire city was?
You know, it's interesting because my family lived in New York City. Always said we lived in the South. And those of us who lived in Baltimore, we were the northernmost southern city, if you will, because the city up was Philadelphia. And we always had an inferiority complex because coming down the East Coast, you go from New York City, you come to Philadelphia. If you took the train, for example, you leave from New York, you stop in Philadelphia, and you kind of pass on through Baltimore to get to DC. And we always felt that Baltimore was overlooked as a destination. My mother always used to say, when she used to watch her soap operas, if they wanted a character to disappear, they would send them to Baltimore. You never heard from them since. And you know, we kind of had a little chip on our shoulder because we wanted to be, you know, because we're just as big as the other cities. You know, we were bigger than DC. Not quite as big as Philadelphia. But, you know, I tell you what turned things around for Baltimore in terms of national recognition, and that were the sports teams. When the Baltimore Colts in 1958 defeated the New York Giants in what was called the greatest game ever played at that time in overtime, that put Baltimore on the map. And then they came back and beat them the next year in 59. And then the Orioles came in and they started winning. So it became a, you know, it was more than just a very quick train stop. It had some culture. You know, everybody knew about, you know, the crabs that were here and there rather. Also the architecture, because the white marble steps that a lot of residents had in front. So it began to take on a life of its own, which was a good thing.
Of all the places, I mean, being a military man, the original Douglas had to run into people that were from a lot of different places. Did there ever become an option to have anyone for you guys to be anywhere else besides Baltimore or New York? Was there somewhere that he always wanted to go that we're gonna move? We're gonna move. We didn't make it to Atlanta or St. Louis or.
Well, because our family, his parents, his mother and father, they divorced early, but we're from Nansemond County, Virginia, which is Suffolk, Virginia. Very agricultural area. And my great-grandparents had a farm. In fact, they were back in, I think, 55 or something like that. They were designated the #1 farming family in that county. And for a black farm to have that designation, and this wasn't just black farm, it was all farms, was pretty impressive. And I remember that my great-grandfather one day took me around and had me pick a little cotton, had me go down to the pigsty, had me go to the cornfield. And I realized at that point, and he said it, said, I want you to see what it takes if you don't go to school. And this is the kind of work that you'll be finding yourself doing. So I suggest you study and graduate and get a job that is, I mean, nothing wrong with farming, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think you have, your sight should be set a little higher. And, but my father was a Baltimorean through and through. And we went down to quote unquote the country to visit, his family and so forth. But, he was a very urbane type of guy. That was his deal. He dressed a certain way, very, very meticulous. We were the first family to integrate our neighborhood in Baltimore back in 1963.
Whoa.
And that was interesting to say the least.
I bet.
He felt that somebody had to do it. And
wow.
But what he instilled in us was that when we act, he always had an expression, act like you belong. Yeah. When you went someplace, don't stand out and be foolish. Go in and act like you belong. And when we moved in that neighborhood, we acted as if we should have been there for the last 20 years. And that's the way it worked out. Unfortunately, some other folks came behind us that didn't quite have that same philosophy. And there was white flight in the whole 9 yards. But, in fact, we lived in that house until their death, which was over 55 years. And
wow.
That was the homestead. And that was my sanctuary. When I came home, regardless of what was going on outside those four walls, I felt safe at that sanctuary.
Okay, there are a lot of us that would just love to hear a little bit more about 1963. I am so curious. So that means you had to, maybe your school might all have been integrated, but at that bus stop or walking to school from that block, what was that like for you? And what was that, 5th grade, 6th grade?
I was in the 7th grade. But let me give you two examples of adjusting to life, if you will, in Baltimore, in that part of town in 1963. We moved in August of 63. 2 weeks later, my mother, my sister, my brother, we all were sitting in front of our black and white RCA TV and watched the March on Washington. Yeah. And when I heard the I Have a Dream speech, even at that young age, I knew it was going to be historic. There was something about that speech that resonated even me at that point, at that young age. But two things. Firstly, I had a guy who was in my, I think, shop class or one of my classes. And we became, pretty good friends. And he lived not too far from me. So we would walk home. And one day, he came into my house. We were blessed to have a pool table in our basement. Ooh. So I was friends over. I was like, hey, here's the man. And so forth. And so one day he said, well, come on past my house, which is about 2 blocks away. And we went in and, it was okay. So about 2 weeks later, I said, well, let's go back, to your house and, watch TV. He says, no, I can't do that. I said, okay, why not? Well, my family said that you're not welcome in my house. Yeah. And obviously it wasn't because I played cards real well.
And then taking all his money.
not quite, but just comfortable with this man who had a tan complexion to be in his house in 1963. Yeah. And then one day we lived right across the street from the Forest Park golf course. Now I'm going back to Baltimore this weekend, as a matter of fact, for I'll go ahead and give the number of my 55th high school reunion. And we're going to be playing golf on that same golf course come Monday. But there was a shortcut behind I think it was the 9th hole, and they had a concession stand, a little mini clubhouse there. And I would ride my bicycle through there to cut over to go to the grocery store, or whatever errands I had to run for my mother. And one day I came back and I had my English racer bicycle, 3-speed, deal. That was the deal. And so I stopped and got a drink of water, and these two white gentlemen walked up to me, and they said, I want that bike. I said, this is my bike. You can't take my bike. And then they started, peppering the N-word at me, and they knocked me over. And, there were 2 against 1. I tried to hold my ground. But I did keep my bicycle, that's for sure, although they bent the wheels and so forth.
Yeah.
And that, and to this day, I cringe with the N-word.
Yeah.
It just brings back those memories. I don't use it in my lexicon. I don't like it when, in certain circles it's okay, but it's never okay for me. There's just something about that. I'm a product of my environment. I'm a product of my culture, a product of my time and on earth. And it just bothers me. And, anyway, so that gives you, but still in retrospect, those were 2 separate incidents. 9 times out of 10, we had no issues. We would come home, it became more integrated. In fact, there was a guy that lived next door to me who played basketball for the Baltimore Bullets, the Roy Ellis. That was pretty cool. And it became a neighborhood. And I remember when our folks across the street, they were white and they were leaving, and they came over to my father and to us and said, I just want you to know we're moving, not because you're here. We love that you're here. It's just that we have a better offer someplace else. And that's all fine. That's life. We all move on up, if you will. And that's what they were doing. I think it's also because it was becoming more black, and now it became apparent. But that's, again, the changing of the tide, if you will, was taking place in Baltimore.
How did your parents view? So obviously the original Douglas was like, this neighborhood needs me in it. But they probably were a unified front, but how did they project it when they started to see, because at that time, I don't even think the phrase was coined, white flight. So how did they present that to you guys about the changes? Was it positive that, hey, more black people are moving into the neighborhood and getting these houses? Or
it became, let me share this with you. The terminology white flight was secondary to the term that was used called block busting. And what that meant was that a developer would establish a new predominantly white development outside of where we lived. Yeah. And what they would do is bring in, and sad to say, a black family that really didn't have the social skills to live in that neighborhood. And so then when they would see folks hanging out on the front porch and drinking beer on a sunny afternoon, that kind of stuff, that started to frighten a lot of white folks. And so then they would come in and encourage these people to move to this new development that they were putting together. So they were able to sell the house and also have another house for these folks to go to, kind of double dipping, if you will. And then they had black folks coming in to move into these houses. And sometimes we had next door neighbors, which really bothered my dad a lot. They came in, he was a mechanic on the side, and he would have engines and so forth on the front lawn. And my father was very meticulous about, maintaining the cutting the grass and making sure, the sidewalks are swept. And I used to hate the term, it's time to police the yard. And then I had to go out and rake the leaves. And, he is a military guy, understand that terminology.
Yes, sir, I do.
So no. But it instilled in us to take pride in where we lived. We took care of what we had. And if somebody came in and decided not to have that same mindset, my father was frustrated by it, because he worked hard to move us to a place. It's kind of like the movie Raisin in the Sun. They moved from a row house, moving out to the suburbs, and we were definitely, this was the suburbs. It's funny because now it's all one big neighborhood. But when we were kids, my mother, we went to church in the inner city, and then when mom needed a ride before she started driving herself, she said, "Oh, you live too far out. We can't go out there." It's only 5 miles, but still, it was way out there. So times have changed, but that was part of the adjustment.
Growing up in Baltimore, I'm going to say you guys had some electric cars. Were there any trolleys, electric cars there?
Yeah, they call them street cars.
Oh, yeah.
But to be candid, that was mostly inner city, and they began to be replaced by just regular buses.
Okay.
So the street cars or the trolleys, we lived in, before we moved to where we lived for 50 years, we lived in, there was a place called Gwynn Oak Junction and also Walbrook Junction. And the junctions was where the streetcars would come and turn around and go back out for the other side of the tracks to get going back to where they came from. So, but during my growing up, I remember, in the back of my brain, riding the streetcar maybe once or twice.
Okay.
But it never became like the cars in San Francisco. It didn't become a tourist attraction. They kind of went by the wayside, and the buses took over.
All right, I'm gonna stay on Baltimore one last time here, unless we come back. A lot of people don't know it's not a destination, a national destination. It can't compete with the Miamis. It's not New York City. Mm-hmm. If you had to tell everyone that's listening one reason why they should go to Baltimore, what would the reason be?
When I was there, I would say because of family. Baltimore are a series of neighborhoods that interconnect, and there was always pride in the neighborhood in which you came from. And that is not quite the same now, because unfortunately, crime, and of course everybody talks about the murder rate that Baltimore is associated with, and
yes,
that's sad. So, when I first met my wife, she was concerned that I wanted to maybe move back to Baltimore from Texas, and she didn't want to go. And I shared with her, no, there was not a chance I was going to move back to Baltimore. So, I love the town. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, and I think I wear my Ravens and Oriole caps and things like that. Yes, you do. But I have no desire to move back.
I'm curious of how you. So you said you lived in Boston. I lived in Boston. I loved it. It was a good time for me. I lived in Connecticut, so traveled to New York City a lot. Mm-hmm. And then you ended up here. I'm just kind of curious, what took you through your stops to finally get you into Texas? So what took you to Boston? What brought you down to New York? Or if I have those backwards, and then what finally got you here, especially since your wife's from Texas? I'm thinking it was the woman. They always get it.
Kind of. What happened was I was married before. When I graduated college, we lived in New Jersey, and I worked in New York. I was majored in mass media broadcasting, and I worked for ABC Television, which was based in New York City. Oh. And then I got an offer to work as an account executive or salesperson for an ABC affiliate in Boston, WCVB. And they brought me up, and I was there for 8 years, thereabout. And then I left and got involved with the hospitality industry. I worked for the Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau. And I had some great success there in that. One of the things that we had a conversation about this earlier today, hospitality. And I was involved with Boston had a terrible reputation when it came to African-American or minority businesses coming to town. And the reason being was because, first off, the busing became a big to-do nationwide, and people saw white folks, banging on buses to keep black folks from going to school in their neighborhood. And then there was a terrible picture of a guy who was being stabbed in front of City Hall with the American flag. That kind of became viral. That wasn't a word back then, but that's what happened. Yeah. So when I got to started working for the Convention Bureau, we realized there was a lot of money involved that we were missing because of our poor reputation for being hospitable to groups of color. So I was kind of given the charge. I kind of put myself in a position to take on this responsibility of trying to change the mindset of the meeting planners who were not coming to Boston. And I started going to these conventions twice a year called the National Coalition of Black Meeting Planners. And I would go there and start making relationships. We had trade shows. And I have to thank two sororities, Delta Sigma Theta and Alpha Kappa Alpha. Both of them took a chance and came to Boston. And they had regional conferences there. And it was I tell you, there was you may or may not know, but a place called Copley Place. And they built this up, and we had the Sheraton Hotel, the Marriott, and the Westin. And they were all interconnected with walkways, and they had retail stores in those areas, very high-end retail stores. So when the Deltas came, I had a conversation with the Merchants Association, and I said, look, what I would suggest to encourage these folks to come into your stores to spend money is to make sure that your windows are adorned in red and white. Those are their colors. I don't think that's important now. No, they don't know. Anyway, when these 5,000 women came on the scene, all adorned in red and white, the next day, almost every window had red and white. Come on in, we love you.
Yes.
And so when the AKAs were coming about a year later, and I met with the Merchants Association, they said, tell us, please, what are their colors? What are their colors? And I said, green. Sure enough, because my mother was a member, and they were going, wow, they even know our colors. I said, because their money spends like anybody else's, and sometimes even more. So
indeed.
So that was a good experience, and I appreciate that. I think Boston is still reaping the benefits of that. I was up there earlier this year, and my first time back in about 25 years. And it was good. The city has changed, but I think it's changed for the better. Boston was a unique town, even with people of color. If you were considered an outsider, you were an outsider. But once you became ingrained in the inner circle, if you will, you had a protection that would last you for life. People, would do all they could to like a cocoon, to cover you and protect you, and that was a good thing.
Yeah, I lived there, and that's how I represent it. One of the first things I say is how friendly the people were to me. Now, every instance is different. I did have fraternity brothers there. I was informally starting a motorcycle club there, and so I got into the biker scene, and I fell into a bunch of different scenes, which also made it good for me. And I think that helped with me enjoying my time there, because I had so many different avenues to meet the locals and be a part. So I love Boston.
I'm sorry, but one of the things that I got involved with, our radio background, and that's where I had a Sunday show on the local station there, local R&B station, WILD, and kind of became I don't want to say infamous, but I became somewhat famous, and that kind of helped with the being accepted in Boston.
Yeah. But when I think of the Boston Harbor, I think of Baltimore Inner Harbor. I'm starting to see a little trend here that you stay coastal. You're that I got to be next to the water guy. So
I got to tell you this.
Put you to Texas. Oh.
Okay, I will say this: being from Baltimore, living in Boston, I was not a seafood fan. And, not after I lived there, I became a little more enamored with seafood. But my wife loves seafood, but that's another conversation. Anyway, I stayed there for 20 years. My oldest, my two children were born there.
Oh,
and then. How did I get to Texas? That's a good question. Oh, I know. I time to tell you, man.
Yes, sir.
I just had a birthday on Saturday. The years are counting up on me.
Oh, hey! Congratulations!
Thank you. I tell you, I got an offer from the Fort Worth, Texas Convention and Visitors Bureau, and and they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
So we moved from Massachusetts to Texas, and I think it was Charles Dickens who said it was the best of times and the worst of times. That kind of
what a change.
Kind of brought that into because got a house and the whole 9 yards, but selling Fort Worth as a destination was not the same as selling Boston. We had to compete against Dallas, and it just didn't have the same facilities. That fortunately for them, that's changed. My marriage disintegrated, unfortunately, and my ex-wife still lives in Fort Worth, where we moved to. Yeah, so I ended up working for the Texas Youth Commission in a town called Brownwood, Texas, of all places. And TYC, of course, is the youth prison system, and I was the volunteer coordinator, made sure that people off the campus who wanted to come and help these young people get back on track, and I was the one who was involved with coordinating all those efforts. And it was good. It was interesting, but Brownwood, Texas, as you talk about. One morning I woke up and I heard a rooster crowing or chirping. And I said, "Where in the world am I?"
Yes.
You didn't get that sound in New York City. You didn't get that sound in Boston, but you certainly got it there. But that was a good experience for me. And then I had a chance to come to Bryan, Texas, Bryan College Station. Yeah. And I worked for Workforce Solutions there. And I had a good buddy of mine who went to we had a men's fellowship at church, and he came. Ronnie Jackson was his name. We became friends, and he would always say, "Boone, you're dating the wrong people," because I was divorced by them. And he said, "I have people in my family who are better suited for you than these people that this lady you're hanging out with." Anyway, I said, "Okay, whatever you say, Ronnie." So one day he called me and said, "Hey, I got cancer." And a year later, he passed. Wow. And right before he passed, he said, I went to see him in the hospital, and I knew he was pretty much at the end. And he said to me, "You got to promise me that you will never give up. I'm not going to give up, but I know I'm on this earth. I want you never to give up. Whatever happens and bad things that may happen in your life, never give up." And that resonated with me. Yeah. So he passed away about 2 days later, and his wife called me and said, "I would like for you to say a few words at the service." And I said, "Well, be happy to." So I think I did a pretty good job, and we went back to the repast. And these two ladies came in, and well, first I went to the table where my my off and on girlfriend was sitting. Sure. And everybody said, "Hey, Doug, great job, blah, blah, blah." And she turned her back on me. And I said, "Okay, I don't need to sit here." So me and my buddies went to another table. We sat down, we're talking, there were two chairs left vacant. And then these two ladies came and said, "Do you mind if we sit here?" So, "Oh, by all means, have a seat." So we started chatting back and forth. And it turns out to be my current wife and her sister.
Oh. That's a heck of a conversation there.
Oh, yeah, I tell you. And so it turned out Debra, my wife, Ronnie was her cousin. Oh. And when he was saying there were people in his family who were better suited for us.
Yes, he did.
Turned out to be Debra. And we both have always said that those were parting gifts from Ronnie after he passed on. And it was, and that was in August of 2013, and we were married in April of 2014.
Oh. I knew it.
Keep in mind that she was living in Austin, and I was living in Bryan College Station. And then we came to the point we said, so I moved to Austin, and that's how I got to Austin. Okay.
Hey. Okay. Really cool.
Yeah.
I want to know, how did you get to the point where you decided I'm going to get into radio? None of that really shows me. So now I'm curious. Did someone tell you stumbled into it? How'd that come about?
Good question. Interesting story. My father, the original Douglas, always wanted to make sure that his shoes were always immaculate. And he would, when the soles would get a hole in them or the heels would run over, he would take them down to this place called Clyde Scientific Shoe Shop.
What a name.
It was a great name. And I would go in there, and on the wall, because the radio station was right across the street, right next door, actually, WEBB, web. And they had the pictures of the disc jockeys on the wall. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I said to myself, one day I'm going to have my picture on the wall someplace being a DJ. So fast forward, on my 10th birthday, my parents gave me a 2-transistor radio. That was high tech back then. And it was yay big. Yeah. And AM. And during the day, I could pick up the Baltimore stations. And at night, I could pick up stations across the country. CKLW out of Windsor, Ontario, outside of Detroit, WKBW in Buffalo, WABC in New York. All these stations, well, they were clear channel stations, and they would come bawling in because the daytime stations got off the air. And I would just lay up at night and just envision, and I'm practicing my little DJ spiel. So then I went down and we're looking at colleges. Of course, Hampton, let me give you a perspective. My aunt and uncle went there first. My mom and dad went there secondly. Myself, my sister, my brother all graduated, and my 2 daughters graduated from Hampton, as did my niece, my cousin, actually. So it was a generational thing. And as an aside, I'll tell you this quick story. I was dating this girl in high school, and she said, "You're going to go to Hampton, forget all about me, blah, 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 blah." And now, baby, that's not ever going to happen. And she said, "Why don't you consider going to Morgan," which was in Baltimore. Yes. So I said, "Okay, I'll give that some thought." So I came up to home one day. Dad was at the table drinking his coffee. I said, "Dad, I may want to consider going to Morgan as opposed to going to Hampton." So he kind of froze. He put his cup back in the coffee saucer, and he said to me, "Son," he said, "this is a free country. You can go to any college you want to go to. I'm only paying for you to go to Hampton." Oh, guess where I went?
That's true bargaining.
And when I got down there, I did forget about that.
She knew it.
Yeah, she was prophetic, no question about it. So my parents would take all of us to Hampton because it wasn't that far from Suffolk when we would come visit my grandparents or great-grandparents. Always take us over to the campus. And they would kind of indoctrinate us as to the campus lifestyle. And Dad and Mom still had friends who worked there. They went to school together there. And there was a guy named William Kearney, who was the head of the communications department. And they had just opened up this brand new building. And in the building was a radio station. Now, my father had been on the air when he was at Hampton. It was called a carrier current station, meaning that they had a wire that would run through the building, and if you plugged in your radio, you could pick up the station. That's how that worked out. And so, but when I got there, it was an FM over-the-air radio station, and I went in there. He had me sit behind the microphone, and I was hooked. No Morgan, Hampton was where I was going to be, and I was going to major in communications. So that's when I got started. I was the DBE, the Doug Boone Experience. And
I like that.
There was a guy in New York named Gary Bird, and he had the Gary Bird Experience. I borrowed from him to use that. And I'd also had inroads with the stations in Baltimore. There were 3 black stations when I was coming through, 2 daytimers, WEBB, which actually was purchased by James Brown at one time. Wow. And he purchased a station in Baltimore, Knoxville, Tennessee, and Augusta, Georgia, where he's from. And he used to talk about he used to shine shoes in front of the radio station. Now I own that station. Well, owning the station and running the station are two different things. And he was terrible at running the station. But the one thing he did do that got to me, I'll never forget it. He turned WEBB from being web to standing for We Enjoy Being Black. And every day, and they signed off with "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." And, and that was interesting to say the least. But there's also a WWIN, which was the 24-hour station, and WSID, which was another daytime station. But I used to love the personalities. I mean, personality radio was in its heyday. And there was a guy named Fred Robinson who lived down the street from us, actually, and he was known as Rockin' Robin. And he played the song "Rockin' Robin" as his theme song. I loved it because he was from New Jersey, and he would call himself the potentate from the Garden State. I mean, these kind of creative ways. We had one guy named Fat Daddy, Paul Fat Daddy Johnson, became a legend, and he would speak 8,000 miles per hour. He was but he would say, "Nobody loves a fat man, but oh, how a fat man can love." I mean,
oh man!
And those are the kind of things that stuck with me. But what happened one summer, I went up to New York to visit my grandparents, and so it was about 5:55, and my aunt said, "Uh-oh, Frankie Crocker is coming on the radio." And I said, "Who in the world is Frankie Crocker?" Oh. And I know she said, "He is so fly." That was the term that she used. He is so fly. And when he came on and started talking about putting more dips in your hips and more cut in your strut, a little glide in your stride, making knees freeze, all that good stuff, I was hooked. It was, and I say that I graduated with honors from the Frankie Crocker School of Broadcasting. But what happened was he was on WWRL, which was a top 40 full-time station in New York that appealed to the black market. But he left there, went to a WMCA, which was a top 40 station, which was making headway. Then he came and formulated WBLS in New York. At the time it was WLIB. But that became the first 24-hour FM station to have what they call the urban contemporary format. And not only because of his persona, his presence on the air was tremendous. He was a personality. Everybody wanted to be like Frankie Crocker if they could. He had the women on his arms, the whole drove a Rolls Royce, all that, got dressed immaculately. He was the epitome. And it was the perfect timing for baby boomers who were just coming into some money, and buying homes, buying stereos, buying cars. FM radios were now part of the car. You bought a car. All this stuff, he helped turn that, that whole concept. So that was a lifestyle for many years. He promoted. One of my greatest experiences was he and Barry White had founded a foundation together, and they had a Valentine. It was February 14th, 1976, and it was the Valentine's Day program at Radio City Music Hall, and it consisted of Barry White, Love Unlimited Orchestra, and the orchestra had 100 female players. Every person in the orchestra was female for Valentine's Day.
Well done.
It was, if you've ever been to Radio City, they have this hydraulic staging. So Frankie Crocker came out, and he's standing there, and he's doing his little thing, and he introduces Barry White. Well, Frankie Crocker goes down, and up comes Barry White, and he's wearing this yellow suit. He looked like a big school bus with a jerry curl. But he came out, and it was such a dynamic concert, and I was like mesmerized the whole time. So Frankie unfortunately had passed away, had cancer, but he really had his imprint on me in terms of radio personality. But the reason why I didn't become full-time, got a good buddy, and we went to Hampton together. And he was in Chicago and Cleveland, Detroit, all these places. And one time he was in Houston. and he was with an R&B station in Houston. He left to go back to Cleveland, where he was from, to see his parents. When he gets back from Cleveland, he gets into his car once he lands at the airport, turns on his station. Now, he was the program director, turns on his station, and they're playing country music. So by the time he gets to the station, the general manager says, "Oh, we've been trying to contact you. We decided to flip formats and forget R&B. Now we're country." He said, "You can still stay and have a job and be the overnight guy playing country music if you want." And I said, "I can't have that kind of lifestyle. I need something a little more permanent. You know, working in corporate America is stressful enough, but to have that type of nonsense, to have a family and so forth." I'm going to take something to drink, excuse me.
Sure.
So, but when I was in Boston and when I moved to Bryan College Station, I had the opportunity to do part-time things. Boston on Sunday afternoons. And in Bryan College Station, I had 2 shows, one Thursday night from 7 to 9 and one Saturday night from 7 to 10. And that's when I picked up the moniker of the professor, because it was a college town and Texas A&M was there. And I thought that symmetry would be interesting, and it kind of stuck. And, you know, Austin's a college town too, so it works out well.
Sure.
But it really, and the thing about it, I turned on a microphone over the air for the first time in 1970. And here we are, 2024, and I've gone full circle and still doing it now that I've retired from the state of Texas. I am thoroughly enjoying those 2 hours a day I do the show.
Everyone of your peers speaks of you with an air of reverence. They're in awe of the way you float through your on-air time. We're not even getting to the music you play, but it's the manner of which you talk, how you carry yourself. And I'm just kind of curious, does that transfer to you? You know, we all have egos. We all like to get compliments. We all like to be appreciated for our work. What say you about just your skill set at this point?
Well, I've learned from quite a few people. I remember, excuse me, listening to an interview with Frankie Crocker.
Yeah.
And I thought all the things he said was, you know, he invented, but he stole from other people. Well, I'm sorry, he borrowed from other people. And he said, you know, he said flattery was the greatest form of being complimented. And so he decided, so I felt I could take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and kind of put my own personality in there. And I always wanted to be able to be a communicator, but I wanted to understand, I understood the entertainment value as well. And that's why I try to incorporate some of the old school disc jockey jargon, if you will. You know, like I said, put dips in your hips, cut in your strut, glide in your stride, make your knees freeze, your back react, and that's a natural fact. And if you can't do that, you must have your soul and don't eat chicken on Sunday. That kind of stuff. You know, I drop it in periodically, but I still, what I try to do, and as part of the professor domain, if you will, is to educate the listener about the songs that I'm playing, where they're from, when was the song recorded, you know, it was the B-side of this song and from this album, blah, 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 blah. And I think that helps to, you know, and especially, and that's not being, you know, unrealistic here, the demographic which I probably appeal to most are, you know, those baby boomers such as myself who are, you know, moving into the latter stages of living, and they like to remember those songs. And what I like to do is incorporate, you know, going back to the doo-wop era of the 50s up into what we have now. I'm not a huge hip hop fan, but I enjoy some songs, you know, and I try to blend them in, which is what we call music mixology. But, you know, I tried, you know, it's fun, it's entertainment, you know, my mortgage doesn't depend on it, quite frankly. And it's fun. and I can go in and I give the station every platitude because of the fact that they give me the flexibility to do what I want to do. And Marion Nickerson, the general manager at the time, said to me that I want you to look at the studio as your canvas. Yes. And I want you to bring your brushes and your paint, and you go ahead and do what you need to do. And, and that's all he needed to say. And I was off and running.
Now I've been saving this, and the time has flown. I gotta know, sir. Top 5 dead or alive. That's what the kids say. But top 5 dead or alive, and I know that's asking a lot. We're talking a bunch of genres, but when you get in your car and you're heading somewhere, you got a top 5. Maybe it's James Brown. There's something that you got to say to yourself. It's probably going to be Stevie. It's probably going to be James Brown. I got to know, sir, your top 5 dead or alive.
You know, it's amazing. I have on Mondays, Motown Mondays, because I'm a product of the Motown era. The first record I ever was given for Christmas was Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes. But I was also given Goodbye Cruel World by James Darren. And you talk about two ends of the spectrum. I played both. I enjoyed it because they were my records on my record player back in the day. And so, and my brother was even more eclectic in his selections, but he was into the Carpenters and the Four Seasons and people like that. So we really had, and then my dad was strictly a jazz person. I'll tell this quick story. For him, if it wasn't Ella Fitzgerald or Nina Simone or Johnny Mathis or whomever, then it wasn't, you know. So one day when I mentioned the pool table in the basement. So Dad was always out shooting pool, and we play. Our record player was down there, our stereo, if you will. So I come down there, and I hear him singing to the Temptations, My Baby, and he's snapping his fingers and shooting pool. I said, I got you. So but as he respected my music, I respected his music, and which was great. And that's the foundation which I come from in terms of the music I play on my program. But to answer your question, my favorite group of all time are the Temptations, for a couple of reasons. They just were, they broke the same way as I was getting into puberty, if you will. My high school buddy, quick story. I'm going back to my, I'll go ahead and say it, my 55th high school reunion this Sunday.
Yes.
And one of the guys that went to school with me was named Otis Harris. We went to elementary school and high school. He went to a different junior high. And so we're sitting in the cafeteria one morning, and he says, Douglas, what are you going to do when you graduate? I said, well, it's my hope. You know, I'm going to go to Hampton, major in communications, and work in broadcasting in some capacity. I said, what are you going to do when you graduate? He said, I'm going to become a Temptation. I looked at him, are you crazy? Oh, anything you say, Otis. I knew he sang, but I didn't know he really, you know. Well, long story short, when Eddie Kendricks left the Temptations and the guy that replaced him was not well received, a friend of Otis's got an audition, and he auditioned for the Temptations outside of D.C. at the Carter Barron Amphitheater, and he was signed on the spot. And his greatest voice, of course, is on Papa Was a Rolling Stone, because it was the high tenor voice in that song. And so I think, I got a buddy of mine who's in the Temptations and is my favorite group. So back to your question, I like the Temptations and Smokey Robinson. Huge fan of the Philly soul sound, the sound of Philadelphia. In Delphonics, the Intruders, those folks, Stylistics. Huge Barry White fan, because again, Barry White came on at a certain time. He brought this big orchestra sound, you know, baby, 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 you know. And one of the greatest things that I've never heard on radio, because back then it was very strict in terms of what you could say. And he had this Baby Blues, and he starts talking, oh baby, I love you, just that. And then one of the lyrics is, baby, you look so good to me in your baby blue panties. And when he said that on the radio, I just almost drove off the road. I said, a whole different deal. And so, I mean, but I respected Barry White for his orchestration or for his delivery, different time. And huge Nina Simone fan. My father played Nina Simone. There was one song in particular, but my favorite is called My Baby Just Cares for Me. And to this day, I still play that song. It just carries he refers to Liz Taylor, Liberace, Lana Turner, all these folks long gone. But the emphasis is still correct. You know, my baby, regardless of who these people are, my baby just cares for me. And I appreciate that. And that's pretty much, I think I had 5 in here someplace.
Yeah, yeah.
Sadly, most of them are no longer alive, but what can I tell you? This.
Yeah. Yeah. The music that you mentioned, to me, I hate to say it's timeless, but I don't know if there's a person out there that doesn't like a song by the Temptations, or 2 or 3 or 4. And so, I mean, you said until now, I didn't know that the Intruders, the Delphonics, were from Philadelphia. I didn't know that. So now I got to go and find out what other groups. I was just telling a buddy of mine that's going to Ohio, and I was like, man, Ohio's had some amazing time. He's going to a music festival in Ohio.
Let me say this. My first wife was from Dayton, Ohio. Oh, Dayton, Ohio is the funk capital of the world.
I agree.
Ohio Players.
Yes, sir.
Lakeside, Heat Wave, and a group called Dayton. I mean, they were the ones. I mean, right there. And Ohio Players, they were, you know, to me, the epitome. In fact, I was a sophomore in college when my then girlfriend, now who became my wife, brought me a 45, and it was Pain by the Ohio Players. And I played that on the college station, and it's like, what is that? You know, that kind of thing. And it just took off, you know. Dayton, Ohio was at one time, boy, I tell you, if you wanted a sound, the sound of Ohio was indeed Dayton, Ohio.
If you had a chance to sit down and have dinner, and you can invite 5 people, dead or alive, doesn't have to be music related, influences, people you look up to, who would those 5 people be?
Martin Luther King would be one.
Okay.
This may strike you as being strange, but Adam Clayton Powell.
Hey.
Who was my mother's pastor at Abyssinia Baptist Church in New York City. Oh. And he became a congressman.
Yeah.
And, in fact, I remember meeting him for the first time as a kid. And he was about 6'2", you know, to me, that was like, you know, 7 foot tall. And he had long hair. And I asked my mother, is this Jesus? He looked, that's the way he looked. Trying to think of Barack Obama.
Okay.
Would be one.
2 left.
There was, I'm trying to think now, who else would I like to? There's a guy named Benjamin Davis. He was the first, I think he was a 3-star, 4-star general in the Air Force, I believe. But he went to West Point, and for 4 years, none of his fellow cadets spoke to him.
Sheesh.
And I just would love to know how he endured 4 years. You know, going to a military academy in itself is not an easy road travel. And back in those days, and not to have nobody would sit next to him. Nobody would room with him. He was bound and determined to succeed, and he did. And that I would love to find out exactly how he was able to manage that. I mean, this thing,
incredible.
I couldn't do it. I mean, but so I'm down to one more, right?
Yes, sir.
Trying to think.
It's tough.
It is tough. But Barry Gordy's wife, Anna, wrote a book about the inner workings of Motown.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have chatted with her to get a real sense of what really happened.
Wow. Yeah.
Front of the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great list. Mm-hmm. I don't ask that question all the time, but every now and then. And I like your list. I like the variety. Mm-hmm. I can't believe you met Adam Clayton Powell as a kid, though.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It
wasn't. You never know in life and where it's going to take you and who you're going to meet. Yeah, no question about it. Like KAZI-FM, who was a congressman. I got ready to put him on the list, but I've met him. So he and my mother were real good friends. He used to date my cousin. And he used to be a talk show host on a WEBB. Wow. I spoke of back in the day. So I respected him even before he got into politics. He had a following, and he has come a long way and done some good things. So I appreciate him as well.
So you've been gracious with your time, and you know, I didn't give you any of these questions beforehand. So you know, we caught you with a few that you had to fire back with it. But I'm curious, when you were coming on, there were probably a few things maybe you want to talk about, some of your mantra, some items. Was there anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't? And there's nothing to say I can't have you back to cover some other topics at a later date, because this was fun. But was there anything that you would have liked to have mentioned?
Well, I think number one, and not to get political, but I'm very concerned about this country.
Yes, sir.
And the direction that it's heading. You know, I lived through 1968. My junior prom was disrupted because of Martin Luther King had been assassinated a week before, and the troops were coming into Baltimore, and we stood outside waiting for my father to pick me up. I didn't have a license to drive then, and just seeing the city burn. Assassination of Bobby Kennedy, lived through the assassination, of course, of Martin Luther King, JFK, 5 years before. So. And I'm, you know, just the tenor of the commentary and the rhetoric of the candidates running for office now is just beyond the pale as far as I'm concerned. I'm very concerned about, you know, the stability of the country.
Yes, sir.
But I am a man of faith, and I firmly believe that the Lord knows what's going on, and He's going to have us learn from these experiences. But He's not going to have us destroy ourselves within ourselves. And I'm proud of that. I thank the Lord every night. My life has not been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, made mistakes here and there. Sure. But He has found a way to protect me that we call a hedge of protection. And that I'm very grateful for that. And I feel blessed. And to be able to sit here, just celebrated my 73rd birthday, and
good on you.
Thank you. Pretty, you know, relatively good health.
Yes, sir.
Still able to communicate as well as I try to, and life. And I have a wonderful wife and my brother, and we just, you know, we're pleased and blessed to be in the position that we're in.
Yeah, sir. I enjoyed it. I certainly can think of a few other little topics and or themes I could bring you back on. So all I can do is shoot the invite. And if our schedules link up, I would love to have you back.
I didn't know what to anticipate. I was telling my wife, I don't know what he's going to ask me or anything like that. But I enjoyed it too. I think it's been, cathartic and a chance to kind of be introspective as to, you know, I'm not back to my radio thing. It's not the fact that I'm conceited. I just have what is needed. And I don't really like talking about myself per se. Sure. But I think sometimes it gives you a perspective to go back and see where you've been
Yes, sir.
And to help you travel, you know, as they say, you know, your past is a history, your future is a mystery, but your currently it's a gift from God. That's why they call it a present. And I try to follow that type of mindset each and every day, one day at a time.
Sir, I can't end it any better. Thank you for talking with Donato. Have a great night.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It took a little while to get here, but I'm glad. You know, timing is everything in life, so we appreciate you as well.
Yes. Thanks again.
Take care.